everyone. My name is Erin Ashley Simon, and welcome to our Comic-Con panel, Changing the Face of Gaming. To set the stage in 2020, women accounted for nearly 41% of all gamers in the United States. Women are not only playing games, but they're actively changing how we think, see, and make video games and participate in experiences. In recent years, we've seen how Riot has created diverse champions like Senna and Samira and hires diverse individuals behind the game and in leadership roles. I'm not sure if everyone watching knows this, but the women on this panel today are not only changing the face of gaming and entertainment, but are breaking barriers and setting the bar so that they are no longer the first and only, but one of many. All right, let's go through our list of panelists, starting with Jessica Nam. She is the vice president and executive producer of League of Legends. She is responsible for the product strategy and game development of the most played PC game in the world. Next up, Shauna Spenley, who's the global president of entertainment. She is one of Riot's newest leaders, joining the company in January 2021 as the head of Riot's new entertainment division. She acts as the driving force behind film, television, music, Riot Forge, and consumer products. And lastly, we have Candace Thomas. She is a principal game designer at Riot Games. She has almost 15 years of experience in the video game industry, working on franchises such as World of Warcraft, Diablo, and The Lord of the Rings. Ladies, it's so great having you here. I'm super excited to hear about all of your journeys within gaming as well as at Riot.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, it's amazing to be here. Thank you.
Absolutely. All right, so I want to start first in your individual journeys. Can you talk to all of us about your journey in gaming and why you chose Riot? Jessica, I would love to start with you. You've been at Riot the longest, 10 plus years, and also the EP of one of the biggest games in the world. Can you tell us about your journey up to this point?
I was actually obsessed with games since I was a kid. My dad and I played Street Fighter 2 on a machine he had in his liquor store, the typical immigrant journey, I guess. I decided in fourth grade I'd get into making games and started programming. And so as I kind of gradually, followed more of the games I loved and the game industry, I kind of started obsessing over why certain games kind of do well and certain games don't. And kind of like during the season 1 of League, I hit up Riot because they were looking into live service seriously. I've loved competitive games my whole life. And so kind of being able to learn on a 2-week cadence instead of 4 or 5 years sounded super attractive, like magical. So over the last 10 years, we've made a lot of League. And collectively with, my team, we focused on improving and learning with players on what makes a great competitive team play experience. And so that's kind of my journey up to today.
When you had friends come over, did you open up the quarter slot section? Because I had an arcade cabinet and I did not open it. That was my entrepreneurship starting early on. I'm like, listen, you got to put a quarter in. Occasionally I'll let you play for free, but a girl got to make some dollars over here,
Definitely in the shop, we would always make sure we put our quarters up to make sure that people went in line in order. You gotta make some change.
Listen, look at that leadership, businesswoman from the beginning. I love it. Shauna, I want to ask you the same question. Has entertainment always been something you wanted to be in? What brought you into that space? And then how did you transition from that space over into Riot?
Yeah, I was always an entertainment junkie of every kind. I loved movies and TV shows. And I began my career really in entertainment. And at Netflix, we did a bunch of different TV shows over the years and films as well. But there was one that was really special that had a ton of fan engagement, like I'd never really seen before. And that was Stranger Things. And for season 2 of Stranger Things, we built an 8-bit game. And that was really my first kind of experience building a game in the gaming world, as you say. So when we did this as part of a great team over there, we won an award and it got all this press and it started to really open my eyes to this massive community that I had kind of missed entirely. And one of the things that I think is most exciting for me now, when I look at it sort of from the inside out, before I was looking at it from the outside in, is this community is so big. 40% of the world's population play games. And I feel like I just didn't see it. I didn't fully grasp how massive it was. And And for years, I sat at that intersection of tech and entertainment, but I didn't see that the true future of entertainment was happening in the game space. And so once I met Mark Merrill, or Trendemir as you know him, I started to just get really excited. I felt like I was missing out on this next massive thing that was happening to society. And so I couldn't help but jump into the Riot, world. And here I am. So, and I would say on a personal note,
yeah,
I'm raising 3 kids and they choose games over most other forms of entertainment most times. So I want to do cool stuff for them.
Absolutely. And I think that gaming has always been a lifestyle. I think it's becoming more accepted as being part of our everyday lives in so many different areas and facets. But back in, 10, 15 years ago, it wasn't. And Candace, you have been developing games for quite some time, 15 years. You're now taking on an incredible feat of developing Riot's first MMO. Tell us about your journey, and was it always a straight path? What led you to Riot?
I guess the beginning of my journey was when I was a kid. Of course, I was a lifelong gamer. I learned to read playing the Nintendo game Faxanadu when I was 5. I learned to type downloading these free games off of AOL. They were called like Betune. So one could say I was like born and raised on the internet. But my journey into games didn't start until I was actually going to college for psychology. And I was at this impasse where I could go to school for psychology, or I could go to pharmacy, and I could be like a doctor without blood. And I thought that was really cool. And I applied to go to school, and the program was full. And so I couldn't go to school for 6 months. And so I applied to Blizzard kind of like as a joke, like, oh, what if I could take a QA contract gig? QA is like testing video games, if you guys don't know. And I ended up getting the job, and it was really cool. And I didn't even know that games were a career, or that you could get jobs in games. And so I just thought it was going to be like 6 months of my life, and I was going to move on to like my real job. But I just fell in love with it. I came in as like World of Warcraft's biggest fan, and made content, made raids and dungeons for like 11 or 12 years before I finally moved on to the Diablo 4 franchise. And then eventually I did all the growing that I could do there. And then so I went over to Amazon for a while to lead up their Lord of the Rings MMO, because I'm like a huge fan of MMOs, in case that's not very clear. I think my first MMO was Ultima Online, but I got really into EverQuest. But yeah, so I big lover of MMOs. I decided to come to Riot, of course, whenever I heard that they were developing an MMO. Like, that's my language. Like, that's basically one of my love languages. So when I expressed interest, I reached out to Greg Street, who's someone that I worked with on World of Warcraft, and I was like, hey, what's the deal? What's going on? I'm really excited about your MMO, because I thought that, like, if anybody can make the next generation of MMO, it has to be Riot. They got this amazing team, they have this amazing technology, and they also have, of course, the IP, the League of Legends IP. And it was like announced that it would be a League MMO. And so I asked, like, what's the deal? Your IP is like creative, and it's thriving, and I want to be a part of it, but give me those details. I was like, why is Riot making an MMO? Because I was like a little bit skeptical. And when he told me why Riot was making an MMO, it solidified my decision to come to Riot. He said, because it's what the players want. And then he opened up like a PowerPoint presentation. He was like, let me show you. And there's all these like tweets and Reddit screen caps and stuff like that for all the enthusiasm that everyone had for the MMO. And I was just like, that's it, tap me in. And so here I am.
And here you are. I think it's amazing how MMOs are your love language. I think mine is probably food, so it's not as exciting as yours. But listen, everyone here has come to this point. You're leading big things at Riot. And my question to you all is, did you ever imagine yourself being where you are now? And what would each of you consider to be the most unexpected or surprising part of your career thus far? Candace, I got to start with you, because your love for MMOs have taken you in so many different spaces and areas.
Yeah. So like I was saying, I didn't even know that you could get careers in games. I didn't know what game designers did. In fact, I don't think that my job existed 15 years ago. So it wasn't something that I'd always dreamed of as a kid. It was just something I kind of like made up as I went. So I didn't know that it would pull me in so many directions. That game design is so diverse. Like I've done monster VO recording myself. I think I'm still credited on Diablo for those. I put on mocap suits and crawled around on the floor. The game development is just so much bigger than I would have ever expected. But the most unexpected part is actually that, like, as my career bloomed and as I got better at honing my craft, listening to the player became more important to me. And the resounding sound that comes from the players is that they need to feel represented, which was odd to me, because growing up playing video games, there was this dude and his name was Mario, and he had this mustache, and you would save the princess and you would play that story over and over and over again, right? Um, but eventually, like, games got more sophisticated. People got sick of hearing all the same stories and seeing all the same figureheads. So um, the resounding effort, I guess, that the gaming industry has put in to make more diverse stories is probably the most unexpected part.
And those diverse stories create diverse characters. And Jess, the League of Legends entire environment has such a vast storyline and deepness to all the characters, the champions that are involved. So what was kind of like the most unexpected part as you were really immersed in developing this specific title and this environment?
I think, I wasn't expecting to even be, at this point where we we were like, supporting such a vibrant part of our cast. I certainly didn't think I was going to be with all of you at Comic-Con at this point either. So, I think it was all kind of a surprise to me, to be honest. But, for those who are kind of like new to League, we do have like kind of like this broad cast of some super cool, some super kooky characters, with really sharp and loud power fantasies, because that's kind of what you need with like a competitive isometric view game to function. And so, what I initially focused on was kind of like making sure that the game was balanced and had high competitive integrity. We was always like online and the time was right, that purchases would work, all of that stuff. And that was my focus. And that was like the less surprising part. It was still hard and complex, but that was my main focus. But it's kind of, to Candace's point, I think an increasing, part of my brain power and what I kind of think about a lot more now is, it was really surprising to me that how, like, over time, how global League had become. Like, even though we had been like pretty focused stylistically on this kind of Western style kind of game, we were seeing players all over the world kind of engage in like crazy numbers with League, which like, I'm just like, holy cow, like, first, awesome, but like, how are we going to actually address your needs and actually like resonate with you? And so it's become increasingly important to kind of invest time into thinking more about like different regions, understanding what resonates with them, what their cultures are like. And so that's been an increasing part of just kind of like the capabilities that we've been working on.
That's awesome to hear. Shauna, what about you?
I don't know. I feel like my career and my life is full of surprises every year. Something new happens. I mean, just last year, when we think about that, the pandemic in 2020, I started the year, working on movies like The Irishman and ultimately Tiger King. And then I ended the year working at Riot and on some of the most extraordinary characters that I actually didn't personally know. And now I get to sort of dream and build in worlds like Piltover and Zon and Ionia and Bilgewater and actually figure out what fans really love about these characters and these places and build this massive, exciting universe for it. Hopefully, building a cinematic universe for the ages. That's so exciting and so ambitious. And I could have never predicted that would have been where my year would have ended. This group of fans, this community, the League of Legends community, is unlike anything I've ever seen before. I feel really honored.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. The community is amazing. And I mean, what you all have done has been amazing throughout your entire career. And what's special is that Riot especially is taking the time to ensure, that players are able to see diverse representation within the games that they're playing. And, the consumers and players they've noticed. And obviously, there's still so much work that needs to get done, but I would love to start with progress, right? And what kind of progress has been made. So my question to you all is, how has the gaming entertainment industry differ today than when you all started? And what has your experience been like? Jess, I would love to start with you first.
I'll admit, part of me joining Riot even initially was looking at the more even gender split. Like I walked into the office and I was like, oh, this is going to be less of a thing I think about or like kind of navigate actively. But like that said, like throughout my development career, it did initially feel like it was kind of like breaking into like the secret society of gaming. Especially when gaming was way less mainstream than it is today. Like today, like it's like everyone's hobby, right? But like before, you would see, a bunch of dudes playing Magic, the Gathering, or like Halo, right? And doing LAN parties, and then you just kind of show up and you're just like, well, I'd like to play too. And so, what feels natural becomes like this kind of new dynamic, and navigating that when the industry was especially like so young and there wasn't a lot of language around games themselves or how you develop the games. So it just made that extra hard to kind of figure out, how do I interact with the community? How do I start learning more about game development? And so that was pretty challenging, but I think all the more reason why gaming being so mainstream today, like what a blessing.
Absolutely. Plus, now we can play with people anywhere in the world instead of having them sit next to us on the couch. Or go to an arcade. Bless arcades though, but accessibility is the most important thing. And Candace, you've been around in the industry for 15 years and you've done so much. So how does it differ today compared to when you first started?
That's actually a really hard question to answer, because when I was new to the industry, I was just so overwhelmed by it. It's hard to separate what was like my own weird cognitive dissonance versus what was like weird and terrible about the game industry back then. And so like my perspective is like I was coming in and like, spoiler alert, this is imposter syndrome, but I struggled with really grappling my identity when I walked in the door, because first of all, I was a woman who was a gamer, and for a very long time you feel the need to prove yourself. Maybe even still today, some women will feel the same way, that I'm good enough to be here. I'm good enough to play with the rest of you boys. And so I struggled with my identity as a gamer. I struggled with my identity as a non-professional. I'd come into the game industry with no experience, just a lot of creativity and enthusiasm and a very analytical brain, and as a big fan of video games. And I joined one of the biggest game companies in the world at the time, working on the biggest MMO in the world. And so of course I'm going to feel very small amongst all of these giants that I work with. So coming in as someone with no experience, but also coming in again amongst the giants, these people who are a very senior team, and I'm a very junior person. So it's really hard to like add all that together. And the game industry is really scary and it's very like hard to approach. But then on top of all of that, entering the arena as the only woman on the team was also like, where do I even find my identity? How do I overcome all of these mental blocks that I put on myself? How do I ask for help whenever I'm terrified that everyone's going to figure out that I'm an imposter, right? So I overcame it finally, like 5 or 6 years into my career.
Yeah, imposter syndrome is something that I feel like a lot of women go through, women of color, people of color. It's one of those things that it takes time to overcome. And even when you do overcome it, you still have moments where you feel it. Shauna, working on the entertainment side, talk to us a little bit about, if you don't mind, if you've dealt with imposter syndrome working in another male-dominated industry, and also what differs when it comes to entertainment and its relationship with gaming now versus before.
I think that one of the things that happens to women, whether it's in the entertainment industry, the gaming industry, or any industry, frankly, is that it does take a little bit longer. And a lot of women, just they opt out. And we've seen a ton of data around this for a whole host of reasons. And I think one of the things that's really powerful that's happening now, you asked the question, what was it like 10 years ago versus today? I see a lot more women. I see a lot more people of color fighting for their role and their place in a way that they didn't before, in the way that I didn't before. And that makes me extremely proud. It does feel like a complete step change is happening in society. And I see that these rooms, our fans and our players are demanding more of us as leaders and, as corporations, companies in general, that, their lives are represented on screen, their lives are represented in the games, that the people in front of and behind the camera, engineers, designers, everybody that sort of contributes to this craft, they have to be diverse. We have to create these inclusive environments. And that just wasn't, it didn't happen before like it happens now. And today it's just simply not an option not to. So from that perspective, I think we've seen material growth across our industry, whether, we're at Riot or inside of the game industry. I think we're seeing a lot of these positive changes. I certainly saw it firsthand across, film and TV in my history, but we still have quite a bit of work to do, in my opinion. On the side of how we're doing things differently, though, I think in entertainment, one of the things I noticed in the movie studios was like, there will be a lot of single shot callers, like a demigod at the beginning, sort of at the front of all decisions. And one of the things I think we're trying to do differently here is to have decisions made from the ground up, with so many of our executives contributing, more voices to be heard and more decisions kind of dispersed. And so that you don't have single points of failure or single points of success. That's another big thing I'm really proud of that takes quite a bit of work actually to get right. But I think that's a big culture shift as well.
Well, you know what, Shauna, I would love for us to dive into the ground up concept, right? And some part of the ground up concept is with your community, but it's also about internally, right? And I think that it kind of goes back to what we were discussing about authentic representation within games, within the industry, within entertainment. And I would like for us to talk about how internal processes at the company is working to ensure that underrepresented communities are reflected in the products and are brought into these experiences that you all have created. And whether it's hiring, whether it's partnerships with creators, creating authentic stories and those stories being told the right way. I mean, Shauna, and this is, I'm a first of all, big fan of Riot, big fan of just the multi-story layers that you guys have been developing in games. And now Riot's releasing its first ever animated series. And I know the journalist in me wants to nitpick and be like, okay, what can I gather? But I'm gonna pull back a little bit. Listen, I'm all for the spoilers. That's what I do for a living, but we will wait to hear a little bit more about Arcane. But what can you tell us about when it comes to Riot's future in terms of building its entertainment division? And as the head, how are you prioritizing diversity and representation behind the scenes for fans, for viewers everywhere?
Well, I always like to think about it, diversity and inclusion takes practice. It's like exercise. You can't just do it once and then expect to be, fit. You really have to exercise, with great regularity. And I think the same is true for us when it comes to creating a diverse environment to create. You have to look at who you're hiring, who you're partnering with, and ultimately the stories that you're telling. So those are the dimensions that we're always looking through. And it's not just one conversation on a day. It's a conversation we have all the time, every week, in every single conversation across every faction of the company. So, and I think each one of us could tell you just conversations we probably had yesterday around how we were thinking about weaving in, diversity and inclusion into our day-to-day job. And I think one of the biggest reasons for that at Riot in particular is because a couple of years ago, Riot had a real reckoning, a real moment to sort of look in the mirror, a whole round of press that made the company step back and ask, who do we want to be? What kind of brand are we creating? What kind of environment are we creating in? And I think when any company goes through something like that, it's actually long-term a gift because, when you have this moment, that reflective moment, asking yourself who you want to be, now it really is in the fabric of the conversations that we have, the culture that we create, the products that we make. And so from that perspective, it is in fact a really cool culture that's constantly trying to be better, become greater at exactly this. I think that's partly, what makes the company exciting in the sense that it's growing at this breakneck speed, creating, with all these rich characters, but also trying to figure out a moral compass and how to be great as a company and build a really strong culture where people are really proud to be here.
Yeah, and I think it's important for me to kind of stop, because there's something that you brought up was really important. In order to have a progressive future, we have to address the past, and we all know that Riot has had a, a past with certain not so good things. But I think this may be a great time to address it, since we're talking about diversity and representation. And for you, Jess, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, but you were at Riot during its controversial time, and you're still at the company. And I want to ask you, and especially for those who are watching, do you feel that, the environment has changed at Riot?
Yeah, I mean, for a lot of the reasons that Shauna's stating, like it wasn't just like a nuanced, you know, piece of our like a moment in time where we were just like, oh, there was an email, and then everyone forgot about it. It felt like the whole world stopped. And I think, like, back when I first started at Riot, a lot of that wasn't in the conversation. Again, like, the game industry was super new. I think a lot of it was kind of born out of very specific groups of folks, like, with their friends kind of creating games. And because of that, you saw very specific demographics kind of be at the center of a lot of those games. And so when, I started at Riot, even then, we were just not, that wasn't in the dialogue. How we could, be focusing on D&I wasn't in the dialogue. And so as that kind of accumulated, and there were cases that we didn't talk about, or things like that, and it was a reckoning. And when time stopped, like, it really felt like every team looked inwards and had like the deepest retrospective of their life. Like, and because of that, I think it ended up, I met probably more people in that moment talking about their stories, sharing my stories, about how hard it's been to work at the game industry. You know, Riot's one of many companies that are, very skewed towards, men, primarily white. And so when we kind of talk about these experiences, it wasn't just Riot. It was just like, how do we actually learn from that, and come from there, and understand, like, how do we actually make impact? And I think that kind of forced us to really take a step back and be like, okay, it's not just about hiring one person. It's not about just, making one character. It's about getting into the habit. It's about practicing and learning from other teams. And we probably have to learn aggressively, so that every team isn't starting from scratch. It's that we're all trying collectively to get better and better and better. And eventually, hopefully, we're all kind of sharing learning to deepen our own empathy, and kind of get a better sense of, okay, what perspectives are we missing? How do we incorporate that into our game development process, as opposed to trying to do one thing here or do one thing there, and just kind of be performative because of it.
Yeah, and thank you so much for sharing that, because I know, especially when those things have happened in the past, I guess the viewers, not all of them, but there's some times where in a company, when something happens, they kind of put everyone in the company under Riot. Riot's doing wrong, or just any company like that. But there are people who are working to make it better, make the culture better, and just make gaming overall better. And you all are part of that process. But Candace, I have to ask you this question, because when you're not on the inside and you see it on the outside, there's a lot of questions that you probably are thinking to yourself, and especially when you have the opportunity to work at Riot, knowing its past situations. What made you come over knowing all these things, and how did you address it, and kind of navigate it yourself?
Sure. I mean, this is exactly why representation is important. Of course, I have known about Riot's past. Um, though I would also like to acknowledge that the entire gaming industry has gone through a similar revolution, just at different times and at different companies. And so it's a story that's familiar to me. So I was just more curious about, well, what is their stance and what are they actually doing to do better? And again, representation is so important because I was able to reach out to some of my women friends at Riot and say, are they actually doing better? Do you actually feel like they've done right by you? Do you feel like your voice is heard? Because I think that's the most important. That one of my key values is there's listening, but then there's also making someone feel heard, which is like two very different things. And that's one of Riot's values that overlaps with mine, is making people feel heard. And so when she told me that, yeah, there's actually a lot of change and we're really honest about it, um, it was really inspiring. And it actually made me feel like when I joined that I would want to pay that forward too, and like reach out to other women and say, listen, I feel heard here, and they're actually trying to change. I mean, I've seen it already in 2 months. When you start at Riot, you take like this like welcome to Riot course, and Mark Merrill and Brendan Beck come in for an hour and a half and just let you ask questions. No, the gloves off, just don't be afraid to ask anything. And I did ask a question and they answered it thoughtfully. And I felt like my voice was heard. And that was like all the confirmation I needed that this is the right place for me.
And when you have your employees, their voices heard, you empower them. And when you empower your employees, that's when it can empower other people, empower the product, and the product could help to empower those who actually play the games themselves. And that kind of all ties back into, why representation, not only internally, but in the actual games themselves means a whole lot. And Jessica, over the years, League has introduced us to some incredible champions with such incredible storylines. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of integrating diversity and representation in the game?
So I was mentioning earlier, that we're kind of constantly looking for new ways to kind of reach and resonate with more parts of our global player base. And so champions are a big part of that. Our newest champion is Akshan, and by this time, I think he's recently been announced. And we kind of decided early on that we, wanted to introduce a new Sentinel, which currently there's like a story arc going on in League of Legends, where we kind of have like a main cast of characters that are kind of going against the big bad, which is Viego, the Ruined King. And so, Senna and Lucian are going to need to team up with some heavy hitters if they're going to take down Viego. And so when we decided, Akshan is going to be South Asian, the champion team kind of came together to figure out how to create this character to be fun, authentic. And so a lot of that came down to, there were two things. So one, on the team side, the main designer on champions, actually South Asian as well. So he raised his hand. He is very excited and wants to make sure that he uses that enthusiasm to not just use his own experience, which he's also using directly, but also working with the employee resource groups that we have at Riot, who also have the same representation, getting their perspective, incorporating that into the character design, as well as the whole team as well, from an art perspective, design perspective, from a narrative perspective. And so we're kind of able to use kind of like the voices of Riot to kind of help us kind of steer the character in a more authentic way, as opposed to kind of educating ourselves in a silo, which I think was always kind of a challenge. And that I think that's why it's been beneficial to not only spin up the employee resource group so that we can actually have some of these deeper conversations, and but also because now we can, if it didn't exist before, we can spin it up. We can also have other game teams kind of also have great conversations with them in the future when it comes to character development too.
Candace, what are your thoughts when it comes to the importance of representation in the game itself?
Just a huge +1 to everything Jessica just said. What's most exciting about the MMO is that we get to take this foundation that League has built, this wonderful cast of characters that has such amazing potential, and then we get to build it into like a fully immersive world, and we get to let the player deepen that connection with those stories and those characters. And I think what's great about that is that since we're releasing an MMO, it will also bring that story to more people. It'll welcome more players into the universe and into like the League champion space. And that's really exciting because players connecting is the whole, that's part of the MMO love language, right? Is to develop those bonds between people, whether they're your friends that you're bringing to the game or they're the people that you meet online. Like having a meaningful social experience is what sets MMOs apart from single player games. And so, yeah, just all the representation, all those building blocks, very grateful for it. There's so much creative potential there, and I'm just super excited.
And the representation is that, and diversity we're seeing across the board within the gaming industry. And it's been such a highlight. But I have to say, though, as someone who is, for example, me as an Afro-Latina, with that increase has come increased toxicity and problems in game, out of game. I mean, listen, there are moments where I'll be streaming, minding my own business, or playing a game, and someone will come in and call me the N-word, right? And I'm not saying, no company, no game is perfect, but I do know that Riot is actually putting processes in to help with those in-game experiences to make it more enjoyable, so everyone can actually enjoy the diverse representation of characters and gameplay mechanics and so forth. And so, Jessica, I would love to ask you this question, especially because, when we talk about League, we talk about the positives, but there's also a lot of conversations around toxicity when it comes to League play. So can you go into some of the processes that are in place for League of Legends to combat disruptive and harmful behavior all across the board?
Yeah, I mean, philosophically, we've changed our stance, and we mentioned this to players before. But before, when we were talking about player behavior, it was kind of coming at it from this reforming standpoint, like let's reform players and kind of focus on improving their behavior as teammates and such. That kind of what came out of that was things like tribunal to some extent too, where players kind of decide for themselves whether other players are kind of in the right or in the wrong. I think when it came to a lot of that, it was effective for the cases that we saw to some degree. So some players certainly reformed and became better within game. Certainly some players got banned throughout this kind of community process, but it was very limited in terms of impact. And so in order to really scale out, and be able to manage disruptive behavior at scale, what we realized we needed to do was also scale our solutions to match it. So one of the things that we kind of focused on is like, hey, let's take the things that we currently have in place right now, like that are pretty basic, like, screening everyone, text messages, how players communicate with each other within game, out of game, expand it so that we're responding a lot faster to that through, creating a neural network, have it be a lot more educated, get smarter over time. And so when we kind of identify a lot of these cases, because as and I've run into this many times too, people will get very creative. If you type, with, like exclamation mark, @ whatever, right? People will find a way to be upsetting to another player. And so we have to kind of speed up our process to kind of get better and better at kind of identifying these cases over time. But the main outcome that we're looking for is really protection of player experience over reformation first, so that we can actually kind of scale that and make sure that more of the time the player is having a better experience when they're competing, because ultimately that's the outcome we want to go for. And then we can have these supplementary solutions. But I think there's also other kind of interesting things that I think, Candace might also be looking into in other games.
I mean, that's awesome that you guys are putting processes in place to help with that, because it's going to make the game, the environment, and Riot's influence way more inclusive for everyone, right? But I have to ask, and I want to start with Candace. What does inclusivity look like for you when it comes to gaming and entertainment? And what's important to you as a woman, as a leader, a gamer, and a creator in the work that you do for people that you work with?
Well, for me, I would say that the most important thing that I focus on as a leader and as a woman in the game industry is empathy, because that ripples into pretty much everything that I do. Mentoring other women, acting as a voice box for other people, amplifying the voices for other people. That's all stuff that I do because I am a very empathetic person. And that's the behavior that I would like to see in the game industry and in the gaming audience. And so I think that developing empathy as a skill is something that is never wasted. And again, like with the diversity within your company and within the stories that you tell, I think that you plant the seeds of empathy in your audience and in your workplace environment. And when people have empathy for each other, they'll connect with each other. They'll work better. They'll be better teammates. They'll connect as humans, and that's really the power of video games. Especially MMOs have a superpower for that. But video games bring people together in a way that other mediums can't.
Absolutely. Jess, what does inclusivity look like for you when it comes to gaming?
It's kind of a lot of the similar themes that we've kind of discussed, but I think if I had to kind of summarize it all together, it's just like, I think it's about kind of democratizing game development and democratizing inclusive game development. And so I think the first allows you to have like more people to kind of fall in love with games and the craft. That's not going to lead you astray as long as you're kind of focusing on your enthusiasm and excitement to make something that you love, and you have a voice that other people don't. That's going to come through. And so that's super important, especially more so in the future. And there's a ton of resources for that, right? There's like, YouTube, podcasts, talks, tools, everything now. On the inclusive game development side, it's just going to be giving you the tools you need to really understand and create character affinity. And then at the end of the day, that's just born out of seeing yourself or others seeing themselves in the games that they play. And so ultimately, those are the two things that I think are going to be imperative right now.
Yeah, and part of that process too is expanding the universe for people anywhere and everywhere. And Shauna, the entertainment world converging with gaming is helping with that expansion. So for you, what is important when it comes to inclusivity in the work that you do?
I would probably answer it in two different dimensions. One is in the culture that we're creating here at Riot. And I often think of that Michelle Obama quote. I think I'm going to mess it up, but when you walk through the door of the open door of opportunity, you have to leave it open. Don't let it shut behind you. I really think that we have to invest in building an inclusive environment in our walls, and that is going to shine outside of our walls. So building a great culture is probably, number one, if not the biggest thing to do. And then the second is really in the stories that we tell and the legacy that we leave. I think we've all seen movies or songs or any expressions that don't age well. They don't grow with the times. I want our stories to age well. I want these stories to feel representative of our children and our children's children, and for them to be, long-lasting franchises that multiple generations after us get to enjoy. And part of doing that is really digging deeply and finding those representation stories and storytellers that are going to do this right. So that's very important to me. It's very important to Riot. And I think all of us really, we feel like we're on the cusp of something great. We're going to launch an MMO, and we're going to launch our first show later this year, and all these amazing games within Forge. And I just feel like we're at the beginning of something so special. And you rarely get to do that stuff for the first time. Well, you never get to do it for the first time again. So it's a lucky time for us. And I think we're very fortunate. And we hope that the fans are enjoying this ride with us.
Well, you three ladies are definitely going to be helping with that process and continue to lead the efforts, not only at Riot, but in the gaming industry as well. Everyone, thank you so much for tuning into Changing the Face of Gaming. My name is Erin Ashley Simon. I hope you all enjoyed this amazing conversation, and we will see you all later on.